Hi, good afternoon. If you have already joined us, we are going to give things just another minute or two for a few more folks to jump on the line with us. So you have a moment to grab one last quick cup of coffee, and we'll be back here in about 2 minutes. All right, we are at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Advanced Threat Hunting, When and How to Apply Third-Party Intelligence. My name is Amber Coulson, Event Marketing Manager with Newspire. Before we get into today's presentation, I'd like to mention just a few logistical items. First, the webinar should last about 30 minutes, but we are happy to stay on the line a few extra minutes if there are additional questions that you have. Speaking of those questions, you can send them in at any time during the session using either the questions or the chat panel in the upper right corner of your screen. We will collect them and address them at the end of the call. And lastly, you'll receive a recording of today's session via email within the next 48 hours. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. We have my colleague, John Ayers, Newspire's Chief Product and Strategy Officer, and Stephen Overco, a Solutions Engineer with SentinelOne. Gentlemen, over to you.
Hey, Amber, thank you. And Steve, thank you for joining us on today. So welcome, everyone. As Amber talked about, we're going to be talking about advanced threat hunting. And Steve and I will kind of take you through some introductions. So we'll start with who's Newspire. And we'll dive into a little bit around the security challenges we're seeing today in our threat landscape. We'll really kind of define what is a threat and what is threat hunting, exactly what we're doing here today, and why hunt for threats, why the need, and what is the threat lifecycle? Where does it begin and how does it end? And what do you need to start threat hunting? And then how do we go about doing it? And then we'll have time for some summary and some Q&A. So what I wanted to start with is some of the challenges that are happening today in our environment. The biggest thing right now is lack of visibility, day in and day out, with the ever-changing landscape we have today. And COVID has actually compounded this, in my opinion, is the lack of visibility. The other piece that we continue to have, and it's been something that's been going on for the last few years, is a lack of qualified analysts or engineers or anybody in the security space. The other piece here is nobody's hunting for the adversary. Everyone believes that a few things right here. One is, they don't have something that somebody wants. Two, they don't have the staff, which actually aligns to that. And three is the tools or the visibility and able to really hunt for that adversary. And I think I'd wrap up, and Steve, I'd love your opinion on this, is that really a lot of people, hence why we're here today, really don't know how to do it. Would you agree?
Yeah. So actually, all four of those points is typically stuff that I run into all the time when I talk to customers. Probably number one, the lack of visibility is the number one wish list item, I guess you could call it, that I get from most customers, because a lot of them, let's say you're coming off a traditional AV product, they just say, hey, I'm detecting this, or they might not even alert at all, which I know we'll talk about later, and why threat hunting is necessary. But unfortunately, not having quick access, I guess, to the right info is the biggest pain point that I've run into. So,
and I think that's a great point to that last point, right? Too long to detect. and to investigate, right? I mean, the dwell time, while it has reduced, it's still very too long, in my opinion. I mean, you're still talking over 90 days, if not longer. So let's kind of talk about what is a threat, right? There has to be intent, right? I mean, every crime, to me, whether this is a threat, whether it's a physical crime, whatever, is intent. This is really, somebody has the goals or the adversary wants to achieve. And then obviously is the capability, the ability of your adversary to successfully breach you. This is really where it's important, right? Because a lot of people don't realize is that the harder you make it, the less of intent or opportunity there is. And a lot of people don't realize that, because the easier you make it, the more of a target you become. And any threat to your organization, right, is the threat. And I think number 2, number 3 is really, or actually 1, 2, or 3, all 3 of these really are important pieces. And I think really, Steve, I think what I'd like to hear from you is opportunity, right? I mean, a lot of people right now feel like there is nothing that no one wants, but there is the data is their crown jewels. People are is in essence, their opportunity. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, I get that response all the time. I don't have any good data. I'm like a pet store or something like that, pet store chain. No one cares about my stuff. But I think what a lot of people kind of miss is they might not even be after you, but they might be after an organization you work with, right? So, like, I don't know, you could be restocking the supplies at, name your company here, but if they do certain interactions with you, if they're expecting emails from you all the time, or maybe you have data about their employees or something like that in your systems, you might just be an indirect kind of piece for them to get into that other partner. So whenever I hear that, I'm like thinking, okay, they're not really seeing the big picture and they're just thinking small. So yeah, that's usually the first gut check that I have with them is, okay, well, who do you do business with? You think they'd care? But
that's a very valid point. I mean, it goes with everything we do. It's the leakage, right? So this really dives into what is threat hunting, right? Why do we want it? And we touched on a little bit of this around the valuable stuff in your network. It's not just your network; it's also the people. It's the data. They're attacking you right now. I mean, people are being attacked right now through various means, through phishing, spear phishing, all kinds of things. I guarantee there's a lot of people out there right now that don't even know if someone is actually shaking their doorknob on their environment to see what's going on. But a lot of them assume, and I'm going to use this word assume, that says, look, I got defenses, I got a firewall. I mean, we're still in the world today that everyone thinks because I have a firewall, I'm protected, right? That I've got IPS or I've got IDS. I've got these next generation things. I spent all this money to say, yep, I'm protected. And really, I mean, it says it very clear here. No silver bullet exists today. Hence why there's so many different methodologies, right? Defense in depth, or goes back to the Trojan horse. It goes back to the moat. I mean, if you think back to the ideas of the Romans and things of that nature, and the castles, there's always those different defenses in depth. And then the other pieces here, I haven't been hacked yet. That the key word there is yet. It's not if, but when. And threat hunting is not waiting for someone else to tell you you've been attacked. This is just the human element of the physical aspect. And I think something you and I were talking about, Steve, a while back was, when we think about defense in depth, a lot of people still, go back to firewalls being the perimeter, and the perimeter is basically no longer there. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, your perimeter could be your smartphone, could be your laptop, your tablet. Especially today, I mean, it was already kind of shifting this way before the pandemic, right? Because more and more people were starting to work remote. It was a thing, but now that people are literally forced to work remote now due to law, it's a very, very different story. And actually, to one of the points that you put up here, the biggest thing that I always tell customers or what have you that are coming on and they're just trying to get into security, a lot of them were just used to throwing an AV on something and kind of just calling it a day, right? They would see an alert, but they would say, oh, the AV blocked that. I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to investigate that. And the problem there is they're assuming that the AV is going to alert every time there's something bad. But really, with threat hunting, you're assuming that there's always an incident going on. There's always someone inside. You're basically paranoid the whole time is what it is. But really you just never assume that there is going to be an alert for something, and that's like where you have to start. You just have to assume that you're never going to get an email from a system saying, hey, an attacker's inside. You should really be proactively going about it, right? So
and you touched on something very important there, and I want to come back to that and keep with this, the assumption, right? I assume. So it really dives right into this slide around, why hunt for threats? Because there's a lot of people are assuming that I bought all this stuff, and the AV is a great example, that it's going to stop it. And that's actually absolutely not true, because a lot of people don't realize that AV is actually the after effect of a breach, right? Or after effect something is found, because then they rewrite the signatures to stop it again, right? I mean, because here 68% breaches took months or longer to discover, and that's so relying on like a technology of AV is probably a wrong assumption, right? And 80% of the malware is really being tailored for specific attacks. Like, great example, Emotet. We've seen a lot. We have seen a lot of Emotet actually crossing borders. While it was built for specifically as a banking Trojan, it's finding its way in other retail type of establishments, because why? There's banking, right? And then we touched on this about the 100 days, but I want to go back to your point around assumptions. I mean, that 68%, a lot of people, that's pretty high, right? When you think about why you should hunt for threats, going back to your don't just assume that the AV as an example will stop it or alert you, right? I mean, that's a point there.
Yeah, and on top of that too, I mean, I know I said AV a couple times, and a lot of people probably do. They might be running more advanced endpoint protection, but even then, it doesn't really matter what advanced endpoint protection you have or EDR, because it's not going to alert on something legitimate. So, for example, I had a customer, it was actually last week. It was a prospect that was coming to us, and they were talking about an attack, and they were like, well, someone phished our credentials, number one. So we had admin credentials out there. And number two, this was probably one of the bigger mistakes. They had some servers that were publicly accessible to the internet over RDP. And I was like, well, yeah. So yeah, leaking the privilege, leaking the credentials is bad, but that might be even worse, especially given zero logons running rampant. So I really hope they patched. But what actually happened was an attacker, they quote unquote ransomed the system without ransomware. And I'll explain how that's possible, because all they did was they RDP'd in using legitimate credentials. Doesn't matter what product you're using, an antivirus or an advanced EPP product, they're not going to alert on that because it's legitimate. So number one. And number two, what he did was, once he was in there, since he had admin rights, he actually just turned on BitLocker and he BitLocked the system, and that's how he ransomed it. So it was pretty.
But the key word is legitimate traffic. That's something, all the systems in the world wouldn't have caught it, right? Unless someone was actively threat hunting or actively hunting on the network for looking for anomalies. This is key here. The key word here is anomaly. Why would this person come in and access an environment at a specific time? But no, that's interesting. And is it just me, or is it RDP continues to be rampant out there? Is it just because it's easy?
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that still, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know zero logon exists, or it's an IT guy that isn't a security guy. So oftentimes I'm running into new customers where the IT guy wears multiple hats, and again, he just slaps an AV on there and calls it a day, and before you know it, patches start sliding, and they don't apply those right away, and it's unfortunate, but that's the world we live in.
And it's actually getting worse, right? So let's kind of talk a little bit about the life cycle. You talked about a use case there, but I mean, there's a great example of recon, right? These are people who actually went out and looked for credentials out there on the darknet, recon that environment, and built a package, or in this case, they already had it. They just used a common RDP and then weaponized. I mean, what I'm showing here to everybody is this is a business. Look at the amount of effort and the agility here around the business of building out malware, ransomware, types of things, that allows people to really exploit you, right? And basically, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, is communication. The bad guys actually communicate and share information faster, more efficiently than any of us in the legitimate business space today. I mean, they are probably they probably have the best customer support that I've ever seen. I was actually doing some research on the internet, on the dark net, and found that there was a lot of information around IDs, that people can actually purchase IDs or personal information about people, and if it wasn't going to work, they had a 24-hour hotline that you could call and they could correct it on the fly for you. I mean, come on, who has a 24-hour 24/7 hotline for you to correct identity theft for you of the identity you actually took off the off the dark net?
Yeah.
These guys are pretty sophisticated when you think about it. I mean, is this kind of, I mean, from your perspective, from SentinelOne, this is kind of similar to you, right? You guys are building out, reconning your targets and building out, delivering it, and trying to figure out how to install probably the top line versus the bottom line for you guys, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, to your earlier point, a lot of people assume it's only like one guy behind a computer in the middle of nowhere that's doing this.
Down in his mom's basement or something of that nature.
Yeah, but what it really is they are really large organizations. I was actually doing, some of our researchers were doing some pieces on Smog, and so Smog ransomware, to be exact, and they use ransomware as a service. So they host a website on the dark web. You can log in, sign up, get an account. They actually have registration fees and distribution fees. So what's interesting is, just like how a lot of vendors will, sell through the channel, they have channel distribution and stuff like that. These guys have the exact same thing. So they have people who pay like $1,800 up front to register as a distributor. They sign an agreement, etc., and then they actually assist in bringing customers to that family of ransomware. And so they don't only have support, they have sales teams. So they compete, because Smog is competing for money against like Maze ransomware, Agent Tesla, etc. So while they all seem bad, just like vendors and businesses today, they all compete against each other. So they want to make sure that their ransomware is the one that everyone's using, right?
Yeah.
So
Market, right? Market.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, stickiness. So let's kind of talk about the market and the kill chain, and where do we catch them as we start to think about threat hunting as we get into more of the deck here. And it really, one of the things I wanted to share with, a win is a win. One of the things that someone taught me one time, I only have to be right once, and that's from a bad guy. So I have some friends that are done some pretty bad stuff. And one gentleman basically told me time and time again, says, look, you got to be right all the time. I only have to be right once. And I thought about that a lot, but looking through this kill chain, look at all the pieces where we have to be right, where they only need to be right once. So right now, the biggest piece we see today is here, right? This is where phishing has really grown due to COVID. I think I saw a recent article about 300% increase due to COVID. Now with the elections underway, it's actually increased more. But really what you think about the chain here, all these different steps, there's only needs to be one time throughout this entire kill chain for they have to be right. And we have to be right all the time. And so that's an important piece that really, when you dive into threat hunting, it's along the journey of the kill chain and where we need to find things. And I think this is an important piece right here about this malicious website. A lot of people don't have this turned on, or if they're doing it, they're just monitoring it. And then this is where the intrusion prevention or detection is not there. And then the malware just continues, right? I mean, this is really a very distinct kill chain. And I'd love to get your feedback on this one, Steve. But I think this is the big piece where, from an endpoint detection, it is look so far down the kill chain. We're relying on other things. And one of the things I always have a point is that the war will be won at the endpoint versus at the email. But it sounds like it's moving up the chain. Would you agree?
Yeah, so primarily where my organization focuses is anything at the detection, the delivery phase and beyond. But one of the trends that I've been seeing is majority of the stuff that I've been seeing, especially with Emotet and Maze and Agent Tesla, they're all pretty much coming in through Word document attachments and email. But that doesn't mean just because majority of them are happening that way that all of them are. So I actually like that you pointed out Militia's website, because what I've seen in the past is they won't even add an attachment. They'll just randomly generate a link that'll be different every time. So again, if your IPS or your web filtering is literally just trying to look through a database of matches to the URLs, they're not going to find anything. So what some of the attackers are doing is they can actually, we hear about WordPress sites getting hacked all the time. That's really them setting up for a lot of these spam emails, because what they do is they take the WordPress sites and they basically embed their code into that site, and then they filter people to it. So people think they're going to a legit site because, okay, it is a legit blog or something like that. But then that web server is actually profiling the browser. It's grabbing the OS information off the endpoint through the browser and all that. And then they start targeting exploits against it. And then they load the attack direct into memory. The reason why that's so popular is because if there's no file, you're bypassing a good chunk of basic security controls that most people are using. So that's really what I've been seeing. And then to your point, business email compromise is FBI's number one, or it's number one on their list for how a lot of organizations are getting compromised is through BEC. So there's a lot of focus on there right now too. So
yeah, no, I agree. It's crazy time. So let's kind of jump in. We got about 10 minutes to work out. Assume you catch something, then what, right? I mean, this is a key point. And when a lot of people are on this call saying, hey, what do I do to get started hunting, right? And I think the biggest thing goes back to the challenges, right, is get data from your assets, right? You start doing what I call that passive defense, right? Just looking, visibility. And a great tool would be Sentinel-1, right? The EDR agent. It's a great tool to actually put on there to start looking. Or in this case, a SIM, right? A lot of people do not have a SIM, nor could they afford it. But there's other ways of getting, what I would say, getting visibility to your assets and find out what's going on, the traffic. I mean, even at home today, a lot of people don't realize that there is actually things you can do to start hunting on your own personal network. You don't have to get into, full-blown SIM and things of that nature. You get Security Onion. There's a great tool out there. It's free, openware. You can look at things. But the other piece is, putting just other things. But the one thing I wanted to go through here is the active defense, which is really that mild threat intelligence into the mix. This is where I think a lot of people don't realize is that if you go out and you use intelligence as a way to hunt, meaning what is active, to your point, you touched on three big things, right? Agent Tesla, Emotet, I think I can't remember the third one, but I mean, that's intelligence, right? That means that that these are the big three that are out there that people are using. So let's kind of use the intelligence to look for the signatures. I mean, I'm former military. One of the things that we were always taught, right, is when you got on ground is to get what? Communication. The others get visibility, build a beachhead. And in this case, this is similar, right? You're getting your data, you're getting your assets, use intelligence about the area you're going in, what may be attacking you, and various other things, and get the capabilities. And if you don't have it, then what do I do? And then who's attacking who? So real quick, and then when you kind of think about this from starting to hunt, this is how to hunt, right? And really, and I'd love to get your perspective here, Steve-O, is it really requires a dedicated full-time staff, right? It's really preferred, right? Because if they can really get good at hunting and looking for the things that the technology, the people process, the technology overlooks, this is where we can actually really bring some very, bring to bear the ability of the people aspect to hunt things down versus just relying on technology. You agree there?
Yeah. So to a number of different points too. So number one, it is really all about the data. You're only going to be able to hunt as good as the information that you have. So actually what I wanted to mention on one of the previous slides when you said, okay, so you've been breached, now what? Or you've started an IR, now what? First advice for customers that are on here, please do not reimage the system right away. Take a copy of the image of what's running in memory, etc. Copy that VM, snapshot it, whatever. Do not get rid of it, because it makes IR a living hell for the analysts to go in there and figure out what
I think another step, Steve. I mean, just disconnect it from the network. Don't
isolate it.
Don't do anything. Just power. If you think your device has been breached, power it up. Just unplug it from the network and leave it in its current state, because you're absolutely correct. This ability to us to look at the memory, look at the data dumps, all of that. But as soon as you start powering it off, it makes IR and forensics actually a nightmare. So
yep. So to your point though, like how to hunt and having people full time doing it, I think this is actually an interesting time to be getting into threat hunting, because there is a lot of really neat technology that can help make it easier, but there's a difference between products literally trying to spell it out for you and a human being actually trying to make sense of it as well. I don't believe that AI, and for the record, we do a lot with AI at SentinelOne. I don't think AI will ever replace a human being. I think it will help us make our jobs a lot easier. Like if you can automate some of the aspects of threat hunting, like maybe there's queries you often make and you want to get alerted to those, great. That's where automation come into play. But at the end of the day, there's still a human being that needs to read the context of what's going on, understand that context, and make a decision as to the next step. So I don't think that part will ever be replaced, but I think that they will mesh together, and that's really the goal, is to have a nice balance.
No, that's a great point. I mean, and like Newsfire, one of the things that we do a lot for customers who think that they're under an attack, or they feel like they're a breach, we have a service called RDO, is Rapid Deployment Onboarding, where we actually can ingest from anywhere, any device, in under a matter of minutes, and start to get visibility. So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's a lot of different tools, but the key right now is to understand what's on the wire, and that's an important thing that I've always told people, is that stop, take a deep breath, let's get visibility, whether that's through deploying an endpoint detection response tool like SentinelOne, getting logs from your firewall and getting those ingested. It really start with the end in mind. What are you trying to ultimately? What's the outcome, right? And then that way we can enrich or integrate that threat intelligence. One of the things that we recently put a press release out, I don't know if you knew this, Steve, is that we actually did a partnership with Recorded Future that really allows us to take a lot of our own threat intelligence we have today that we curate, and getting Recorded Future and bring that together, right, which allows us to really get those triggers from various sources, right? And it's an important piece here when you're thinking about how do you communicate, how do you get short-term containment when you're doing threat hunting. I mean, one of the things I'd like to hear from you is from EDR standpoint, do you think EDR is probably the best tool, or is it a combination when you start to leverage for hunting?
It's really a combination. So to your point, just like in prevention, there's no silver bullet. I don't think there's necessarily a silver bullet perfect one product when it comes to threat hunting either. I mean, for instance, EDR is just showing you information from the endpoint.
Right.
But I think one of the things that you guys do very uniquely is you're not just taking data from the EDR. You're taking data from the network stack, so like the firewalls and other sources. So what that gives you is you're not just tunnel visioned on, oh, what's going on at the endpoint? Let's see what's happening at the endpoint. You guys actually correlate the information that we give you, and I know you correlate it with stuff from, like, for instance, Fortinets and Palo Altos and stuff like that, and then that gives you guys a complete picture. So having all that data correlated and then being able to take in another source of information like a Recorded Future. So for the record, Recorded Future is kind of like a sister company to SentinelOne, because the VCs that invested in both of us, so we have a pretty good relationship with them too. They have a lot of really awesome data in their database that can really make life a lot easier when you're trying to match things. So again, it's really a combination. It's not just going to be one product that you buy and boom, it magically does it. It's always good to go best of breed in everything you're doing, in my opinion. So
that's key, right? When you talk about best of breed. So we're going to wrap this up with that point, right? That it's changing, right? Nation states, organized crime, cyber terrorism. I always like to joke that Russia thinks of us as a piggy bank, and China really thinks of us as an infrastructure player. And then you got the guys that are out there like eco-terrorism and things of that nature, cyber terrorism. But this is the new norm, right? We have to now assume that this is the new norm. Some parts of their networks probably are already compromised. I mean, we've dealt with a lot of customers who have been compromised over a year ago, and they just didn't know about it. And now getting in there and starting getting visibility into your environment, we're able to educate them. So one of the things that we just recently created was a discovery tool that allows us to model them and kind of do really kind of a background check, right? To say, hey, look, are you compromised already? And the one thing I want everyone to walk away that's on this webinar today, data is your asset. Whether you believe it or not, whether it's the smallest thing as a credit card or anything of that nature, what we have learned is that data is, and you need to protect it, whether that data is around your blueprints or your people or even your processes. It's your asset, because once you're breached, it's a proven point that most companies never can recover. I mean, Target, of all people, it cost them millions of dollars. They were a big multinational company, but it hit them. Equifax, still hurting them today. One of the things is governance as a framework. One of the things that I've always, and I keep telling people, is don't fear the auditor, fear the hacker. Compliance is there to build a framework. It allows you, whether it's not a silver bullet, it's really designed to help you understand and assess your risk and awareness of your training for your people, things of that nature. And the real big thing is that, look, I think Steve-O actually touched on it, right? Which is, determine your core competency. A lot of people are in multiple hats trying to do multiple things. You focus on what you do well, and then outsource to people who can help you, which then means partnership, right? The big thing here, like we've done, right? Newspire has partnered with SentinelOne. We partnered with Core Future. We partner with a lot of companies because we can bring these things together, because information sharing partnerships is essential to success, whether you're hunting, whether you're monitoring, whether you're responding. And really, the one thing I want everyone to walk away from here is, technology-based controls, while they are important, they're not a cure-all. They do not assume that, hey, that they're going to solve everything for you. Hence why threat hunting was created, and it's an important piece. And Steve, I'd love to, last couple minutes here, get your thoughts on anything here that I may have missed.
Yeah, I mean, no, to that last statement, the whole reason why endpoint detection and response exists is because people were still getting through endpoint protection platforms. So if EPP was perfect, you wouldn't have a need for threat hunting or EDR. So,
well, same with SIEM, right? Or a firewall, next gen firewall. I mean, you wouldn't need it, right? If it was all perfect, I mean, one thing that I forgot that you didn't touch on was telemetry, right? HSA type. We have an agent that we actually goes out and does Windows event logging, where a lot of times those are the things we can look at for lateral movement, the RDP type things. Who's logging in, when do they log in, domain files. I mean, all these things are all pieces. Point products that need to be correlated. So it's a great point.
My opinion, automation's gonna always help a lot, but again, you still need a human being that has the expertise to understand what's happening. Like with the case that I said earlier with the whole RDP breach, while an EPP platform wouldn't have been able to prevent that, if they had threat hunters actually looking at the data that were familiar with the environment, so they know, okay, it's kind of weird if I see an admin logging in at 1 a.m. to this server. Oh, wait, he's coming in from an IP address from middle of Europe. They don't have anybody over there. Like, having the eyes on glass and the ability to recognize that is honestly what would have helped them, and then they could have avoided the breach. So yeah, it's constantly just being paranoid is what it comes down to, and making sure that you're working.
What you're saying is trust but verify, or zero trust, right?
Zero trust. There we go. Another big buzzword, but yeah, zero trust is really the point. There is, back to the VPN point. I could talk forever about VPNs and zero trust models, but I'll save everyone on the call from that. But yeah, that's why threat hunting is so important these days, because infrastructures are becoming more complex, they're becoming more remote, and it's not the same world that we used to live in. So things change. We need to change the security around that. So
yeah, I agree. And people need to change their thoughts at home. Today, the viewers are working from home. I laugh when I see these commercials. If these walls could talk, they were never designed to be your office. Now they are your office. So what do you need to do? And that threat hunting now is more relevant than ever because of the perimeter being so far out. So I guess this is where we're in. We're at Q&A. Amber, I think I'll turn it back to you for any questions or comments from anybody.
Absolutely. So just a couple quick questions here from folks. You may have touched a little bit on this, but what skills are needed to really be a successful threat hunter?
Oh, Steve, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I can start a couple things. It's really, number one, you have to have the right mindset. So again, it does take training. It does take experience. Even I'm not perfect at it. I know Patrick Tomlin over there in chat's probably a lot better than I am at it. But I think the number one thing that's really important is you can be a threat hunter, but no one's going to know a customer's environment as good sometimes as the customer or the staff that built that environment. So I think what's really important is for the threat hunters to really communicate with the customers that they're supporting, so that way they can understand, oh, is this normal for that environment? Is this not? And I think that's one of the biggest things, is just being able to recognize anomalies very quickly. But the other thing that I want to mention too, and we were talking about how do you hunt, one thing that we see all the time is people relate IOC searching to hunting, and IOC searching is not hunting. It might be part of it, like you can start with an IOC search or something like that, but hunting is a lot more strategic. Like we have one gentleman on our IR team here. His name's Lucas. So Lucas, if you ever see this, love you, man. But one analogy that he made is we call it the rabbit in the cave. It sounds a lot weirder than it is, but he actually meant bear in the cave. We just never corrected him. But if you get an IOC saying, there's a rabbit in this cave, well, IOC searching is basically you're going to that specific cave looking for a rabbit. If you don't find it, your search is done, right? Whereas if you're hunting, what you're going to do is you're going to strategically look for all the caves in your domain, and you're going to constantly be looking through those caves for traces of rabbit, so on and so forth, right? And so the hunt never ends, really, like an IOC search does. So it's really just having that mindset to think more strategic than just tactical, if that makes sense.
And broader, right? And
yep.
Broader. Yep. Great question. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
All right, and we'll end with one last question, gentlemen. What are the perspectives for an IA threats analyst or hunter?
Perspectives.
Yep. What are the perspectives for an IA threats analyst or hunter?
I'm trying to figure out what to relate perspectives to.
What perspectives to, and what's IA? Is that the threats or analysts or hunters?
David, if you're still with us, you want to add a little more to that, you can certainly do that.
And then there's a question right now. Maybe we'll go to this one, Amber, real quick here. Mm-hmm. There are many third-party intelligence platforms. Which one do you recommend? I can only speak for Newsfire. Newsfire did a lot of research, with a lot of third-party intelligence. So we settled in on Record a Future because of the broad aspect of it. So one of the tools that why Steve talked about indicators of compromised IOCs, it's just a component of threat hunting. One of the things that we can use, though, is understand what we're going into the environment. Record a Future gives us a lot of that deep dark net visibility of what may be out there about this device or this customer and their environment. The cave, right? The bear in the cave. We can actually scour a lot of information. So Record a Future is a really good one. I recommend that one. The other one is Deep Instinct is a really good one out there. But there's a lot of other intelligence where we have our own open source threat intelligence. We use NIST, and we use some other things that allows us to bring in our own intelligence that we're gathering from other types of files and logs. We have probably 90 billion logs that we get every quarter, and we actually create our own threat intelligence report or threat report that comes out quarterly. If you have that or have access, go to our website. We have a new one coming up. And now, Steve, I think the question goes back to your point around AI, artificial intelligence. That's what he's getting at. So,
gotcha. Yeah. Well, to your point too, there are a lot of feeds out there too. Like VirusTotal is a popular one, but again, those are just IOCs. Those aren't
Right.
going to do threat hunting for you, but they're good things. Like, okay, yeah, if you have a match on a system, great, it gives you a good starting point, and then you can keep going from there. So that's that's oftentimes I think how IRCs are really well used are as starting points. As for intelligence platforms, I mean, really one of the biggest buzzwords today, I think that Gartner coined, was like XDR, which is basically what you guys do at Newspire. So what it is the XDR platforms are taking intelligence from intelligence feeds. They're taking data from sources like SentinelOne, like firewalls, like email filters, and then they're taking that information, correlating it, and making sure that they actually present a complete story to the analyst. So this might actually, I just saw David's question, and he updated future views for threat analysts and hunters. This might go into that future view a little bit, and that's as platforms like the one that Newspire's built become more mature. It does make the time to respond and the time to understand how things are happening, it cuts that down drastically, because now your threat hunter isn't going out there and pulling logs from every system manually and then lining them up manually. It's now the hunter has a complete 360 view of everything that happened. And again, it might just take a minute or two for them to look through the story and understand it and then issue a response. So when I think of intelligence platforms, I mean, it could be any number of things depending on your perspective. There's that word again, but I mean that's kind of how I see it, and hopefully that helped answer a little bit of David's question too with the perspectives. But I think it's a really exciting time to be alive and in cybersecurity, because we're not just dealing with AV and their raw logs and then having to go fetch Windows event logs and all these other ones. It's okay, the data's there, the story's presented to you, understand it and respond. So it's definitely a lot more automated.
And Steve, I think it actually lines up very nicely to the MITRE ATT&CK, right?
Yep.
So some actually can speak to MITRE ATT&CK and the use of threat hunting, and actually it's a great modeling tool, right? When I think of MITRE ATT&CK, it's actually telling me, what, like malicious code, how is it actually going to repeat itself, and hence, MITRE ATT&CK is a very good tool to understand how to approach threat hunting. At least that's how I look at it. What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, so this actually kind of feeds into the IOC discussion. So if we look at maybe the four most useful things to a threat hunter, you have indicators of compromise, indicators of attack, so IOAs, TDPs, and complete storylines with all the data already correlated, right? What MITRE ATT&CK allows people to do is, I mean, those are really TDPs, so tactics and techniques really that are presenting. So rather than needing to look at just an individual IOC, like, I don't know, here's a hash, well, that hash could change at any time, right? So that might not apply to your environment. But if you can look at the actual tactic or the technique that's being used to attack the environment and be able to easily query that. So this is why MITRE ATT&CK is so awesome. And a lot of products such as ourselves, we integrate that directly into our platforms. So that way, when an agent does detect something, or when you're threat hunting, you can actually use those TDPs and then understand, okay, what's being used in this storyline a lot more quickly. But it also allows people to speak a common language. So if you go to any individual, let's say you could be dealing with a threat analyst from this company, a threat analyst from Newspire, et cetera. If we're all speaking the same language and understand what's happening, that also reduces the time it takes to understand the context of a story. So it's really, I don't know, you said NIST earlier. A lot of people are standardizing on NIST and on common frameworks just because it really does help simplify things to another level. So
what would you recommend? Which NIST framework would you recommend? I know what one I would recommend, but I just to close that loop on NIST.
Let's see. I honestly haven't looked through it in a while, so I'm a little rusty on the NIST side of the house. For instance, we're actually ISO 27001 certified. We started there first on that framework, so we're a little bit more familiar with that. But
NIST 853 is a pretty good one, right? Because Department of Homeland Security, that's a pretty good one to match yourself up with. So
that's That's typically the one that I see. Yeah, that's typically the one that I see most customers and partners asking about, because a lot of people do ask us if we're aligned, and we're working on it. But we started with ISO, and then we went FedRAMP to make sure that we could hit that certification. So, but yeah, I think from a threat hunting framework, MITRE's got a lot of cool stuff going on. So they have attack, and then I think they just came out with a new one. I forget what it's called, like Shield or something. But that one's more for defense than looking at attack metrics.
Yeah, and some last question, and some says, play devil advocate. If you follow this, wouldn't the adversary also know? Look, it doesn't matter. Adversaries are a business. Whether you're NIST, whether you're SANS, whether you're ISO 27001, they don't care about compliance. What they care about is opportunity. And I think what people need to understand is that don't fear the compliance. The compliance is the ability to standardize or build a framework for protection, right, or to fill some holes. Hence why there's no silver bullet. I don't just think that following NIST is a tool, or following ISO 27001. There's many things across. That's why you see a lot of cybersecurity companies who have multiple. They use the Unified Compliance Framework as an example to bring it all together, but just one isn't. But I wouldn't agree with that to be devil's advocate. This why everyone knows about it. It's there. It's just a good baseline, good foundation to work from, and then up to. Right. That's every good house, every security environment needs a good foundation to start from, and that's what that is. And then you build from that. And this is a good way to start with that. But then putting in MITRE ATT&CK, right? Putting in various MSS type services, MDR, EDR types of things, all those things in the right intelligence, bringing that together to have that extended threat response is the key here. So,
Yep.
All right, Amber, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. This was a great conversation today. Thank you to everyone for your questions and for actively participating. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to us at webinars@newspire.com, and we will certainly get back in touch with you. In addition, on November 10th, we have our next webinar, which is entitled How to Tailor Your Security Program to Your Industry. If you'd like to learn more about that, or really any of our future sessions, you can find it on our website, newspire.com/events. With that, I thank you all, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.